Maggie Moon. Thank you so very much for joining me today for this very special Witches and Wine. I am extra excited today because I am having the opportunity to have wine and a witchy chat with a person that I truly admire. You may know Dan Updike from his publication, The Transcendent Keys to Power. He is the host of TDP Videocast, also the host of the former podcast, the NRR, Northern Ruins Radio. Join me in welcoming Dan Updike. Greetings, Dan. Thank you so very much for joining me today. It's such an honor and a pleasure to have you here on my channel. I'm so excited.
I'm excited to be here too, Maggie. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if it's possible that anyone who may not know who you are, but just in case somebody's new, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I don't know. When I think about it myself, I really don't think there's all that much to tell, but apparently some other people think differently.
Yeah.
Um, I just, I don't give myself titles. You know what? I've been in situations where people had all kinds of titles, and I had some myself, but they really don't mean anything. I am an occultist and a student of the mysteries. And, where that's concerned, I'm not just a student of a certain set of mysteries. I am looking holistically, and have been for quite some time, at what causes things to actually work. And that's been a fascination of mine. It's been a passion of mine because it also leads to an awakening of consciousness and of the soul in ways that, just putting out, let's say, one particular system will never do fully. It'll help, but it's not full. And so I started out in that a long time ago. I'll probably get more into that later on as we talk, but uh, the earliest I can remember was when I was 4. And that was, of course, drawing certain symbols out. Now, of course, I didn't know they were symbols, and I didn't even know how to write. I was just drawing and doodling, and then I was punished for putting something of the devil on a piece of paper in our house. And so it's obviously I grew up in an evangelical background. So,
Okay, yes.
I started actually talking about runes and the northern mythologies on a station that I called Northern Runes Radio and then abbreviated it to the NRR, basically to take up less room on the screen. And we did that for years. I had a partner, his name was Glenn, and we did some good work together there. And then I took a hiatus for, I think it was about a year. I shut everything down. I'd said everything that I was going to say at that point in time. And then I began doing what I'm doing now. Uh, and of course, I called it the Damned Podcast, which is the TDP, because of the fact that many people that have mainstream spiritual philosophies would say anything that disagrees with their particular dogma is damned. And it was also a very easy name to remember. So, what was the name of that damned podcast? And so there it was. And then I just, after, okay, here we are. We're ensconced on this now. I just called it the TDP, and it was easier to make a logo for it. So, but that's where I'm at right now. And of course, I work with a community privately, and we have the public channel. Which is just called the TDP Videocast. You can just type that into any search bar on YouTube or what have you, and we should come up. I think we're blocked in a few countries, but not in most of the ones where people ever watched us to begin with. So that's where
Awesome.
we're at.
Awesome. And I highly encourage everyone to check out Dan's Patreon, but we'll get more to that later, and all the links are going to be in the description below. So I have some questions. Were you always a left-hand path practitioner? If not, what, if any, tradition were you brought up in? And I think you touched on that briefly just a moment ago.
Well, I was born into the household of a Pentecostal family. For those of you that may not know what Pentecostals are, they're a very extreme group of evangelicals. And they also believe in supernatural occurrences. My father, when I was very young, became a preacher, so I was basically raised in a preacher's home, and all of the things that go along with that. It was not when I was in those years, as I mentioned earlier, when I was four, I was drawing symbols. I kept drawing these symbols when I was at school, when I started going to school, and never showed them to my family again. And I used to draw these symbols out. I found out later that they were 18 of the 29 or 33 runes of the Anglo-Saxon Futhorc.
Wow.
And my favorite rune was Os, which, of course, in the Elder Futhark is Ansus. And so that used to decorate a lot of things that I had. But I really wasn't a student of the mysteries at that point in time. But I always had the interest when something would pop up. And as I got older and into my teenage years, I began to go to whatever source I could find and realize, folks, at that time there wasn't the internet. We looked at microfiche films to look through databases. And I would go to the public library and I would read and read and read. And then later on, I discovered they actually have bookstores that sell this stuff. And I went and I found books there and started to read. Now, it didn't really give me a whole lot of wisdom when I was doing that, but it helped to fill in some gaps. But when I was in the teenage years, realized as well that most of the information I got was very biased. And there was something that didn't smell right about that to me, even at 14, 15 years of age. But there wasn't anything else to read. So I would look at things and see if there was anything that I could do. And I would go out without any knowledge of any system to places that were very secluded. And I would spend hours meditating. And I didn't really realize that that was meditation at the time. And this is all bulldozed over now. They got rid of it. But in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, where I spent quite a few of my younger years, they had one of the largest mental asylums in Western Canada, the Souris Valley Hospital. Now, of course, most of that was closed down at that time, but they had been operating since like 1908 or something like that. It was a lot of things happened in that place. That it was haunted, people would whisper under their breath. But I remember one particular experience where somebody in the church that we were at slapped me across the face on the steps of the church because I'd said something that he didn't like.
Wow.
I was so upset. I went out to that place and I was just upset and I was trying to just relax. And I saw a young woman with long red hair looking at me. And I was, strange, who are you? I wasn't afraid. But she sort of got down, because I was sitting in the dirt. And she got down and she said, draw with me. And she would make these movements all over the dirt. And so I would mimic her movements. And then she said, sing with me. And so she had me sing. 2 days later, that man was carted out in a straitjacket from his house and sent to a mental institution. And I mentioned that because the place that I was at was in the field where there was a lot of trees and an old railway track at the
Oh,
Souris Valley grounds.
wow. I have
So,
truth bumps.
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Wow.
and so I realized at that point in time there was something there, and so I kept it in mind. I was also under a great deal of pressure from my family to follow in my father's footsteps. They may deny that, but it did happen, and of course all the people that were associated with him too, because my older brother had done so. And so I thought, well, what the heck? And so I studied theology. And I went to ministerial college and so on and so forth. And I actually became a credentialed minister. And out of 7 layers of credentials, I had the second highest rating. I went out and in that denomination, I was out in Ontario, and I was the assistant in a pretty mid-sized assembly, and but things were very odd there. That place apparently was shamanically considered a hotspot. People from the Native American cultures from various different tribes would come to that place, to Rainy Lake, and they would have their powwow type of a thing, not the public kind. It would be where their shaman would get together. And it was interesting that I always ended up in these places. And so there was stuff that I couldn't resist studying there too,
Yes,
while
of
I
course.
was involved in church work.
Yeah.
Uh, and then there was a tragedy that happened to a family that had been part of the church. This poor lady, she was only 15. She was in one of those jeeps that has the crash bars around it, and the thing rolled in the ditch,
Yeah.
and she had a broken leg. But bone fragments went into her bloodstream and hit her lungs, and she died.
Mm.
So I had to help say the funeral over this person, and I was told, Dan, you need to make sure that when you're standing up there, you're completely neutral about everything that you say. Well, I knew because I grew up in this, that was code. She's burning in hell, but don't say anything about it, type of a thing.
Yeah.
And the hypocrisy that I saw offended me to my core. Now, I'd seen quite a bit of that before when my brother was involved in things, and my father too. I'd seen stuff happen, but here I was first hand, front row seat to the way they treated people. And so I said after that was over to the person I worked with, I'm done. And I left. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I ended up working at some pretty lousy jobs. Uh, Ended up going through a stint of poverty, and then I got out of it. But the thing is that I kept wondering, why is it that in spite of all the things that I've been pressured on, that I've been raised with, am I always ending up either like the experience of drawing out symbols that turned out to be runes, to go to hot spots, to see a place that was a secret lodge of occultists that thought, oh, nobody will ever find us out in the wilderness. I walked right by it and looked in their window from the place that I was walking by and saw them doing it. They freaked out and they ran out the one door. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, why is it? And so I just continued. Only I started to get more serious at that point in time. Now I realized I'm still fairly young. I'm about 20 at this time, and I started doing speaking in churches and stuff when I was 15.
Wow.
So that's a bit of background with this. Now, when I got through this experience of getting out of the church and getting away from all of these different things that were influences, because of course you're trying to keep the family together, you're trying to not cause friction among people in the household, because of course it's not worth it. And so I never really talked about what I was studying or doing. My daughter at one time found my tarot cards. She laid them out all in order. She'd never seen them before. She laid them out all in order. And I said, what are you doing? I'm playing with your magic cards, Daddy. So,
Yes.
stuff like that happened, and that she got it all in order and right
Wow.
was freaky, because of course I was going by Kabbalistic symbolism at that point in time, and that's not simple symbolism.
No.
And so you know, yeah, she was only about 5 or 6 years old, and she did this. Uh,
Wow.
so, yeah. So, what ended up happening is that I came across an order that was a branch uh, of a now defunct Golden Dawn order. Uh, Most of the orders that existed in Canada actually closed down. Most of them now, if you look at them, they're all in the U.S. I know a guy here, just as an example, here in Edmonton, that was once the Grand Master of the Nephthys Lodge of the Ordo Templi Orientis.
Okay.
However, that no longer exists here. It closed down 30 years ago.
Okay.
So I thought, of all the luck, I found this. And so I got initiated into their order. And that was right hand path. That was all I thought of at that time. I wasn't too well versed in right hand path and left hand path and all this other kind of stuff, but they had some pretty good knowledge. And for those that are, they've never seen the right hand path before in their left hand path, if you think that they have no power and energy in the right hand path, you are sadly mistaken. And sometimes they are far more gruesome and brutal than left hand path orders, even on their own members. They have magical wars between themselves all the time. And how they talk about how, you love and light and summon Asmodeus to kill that son of a bitch.
Yeah.
So they do this sort of thing, right?
Yes.
And, so I sort of saw some of the hypocrisy that was going on with that, and I was irritated because it brought back a lot of the feelings that I had when I
Mm,
was growing up in the church and when I was having
mm,
my own experiences with that. And so I had words with some of the people of their inner order at that time, and I became wroth with them. And then I did something pretty petty. I sat down and pointed out all the misspellings of the divine names of the Sephiroth that they had put on the Tree of Life and told them they didn't know shit.
ah,
After that, I was asked to leave with their left foot of fellowship.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just that way. And so I was on my own for a while.
Yeah.
And then I came across some people who had also been sort of expatriated from some various different orders. And some of them actually, they were professional people. And they were from around the world too. The person that taught me the tarot, for instance, was a naval officer in the United States Navy. He was very disciplined, very intelligent, and other people that had proof of their belief and philosophy in the experience of their life. That didn't mean they didn't have challenges, didn't mean that things didn't go wrong. Anybody that thinks that doesn't know what they're talking about. But they were able to manifest things and show true proof of their power. And so I was interested in that. And they called themselves, after we got together, uh, the Order of the Black Cross. Now, if you go searching on the internet for that, you're going to possibly come up with some really weird organizations. That was none of it. They were not on the internet.
Okay.
Okay. What the Black Cross meant to them was the Black Cross of the Enochian system.
Okay.
However, they had a different viewpoint on it. And I am able to share this. They would take the tablets and tilt them to a 45-degree angle. And the reason for that was that if the earth itself is not straight up and down, why is the black cross of the tablets straight up and down?
Mm,
But the earth isn't tilted on a 45-degree angle. No, it's not. But the earth has a wobble in its axis, and the 45-degree angle is to deal with the way the tablets look when they are put together. When they are put together, it's a giant square with squares in each quarter and the black cross uniting them all. So it was meant to be a vantage point through which you could go to each of the arms of the cross and be at the correct angle.
Interesting.
So it was an interesting thing. Now after this, I just worked on how I could use these to develop my own self, to develop my own concept of self. And at that time, I began to look at some Luciferian thought. And I came to the conclusion, as I looked at this and began to study the Luciferian thought, I'm not talking about modern Satanism, I'm talking about the Luciferian thought. I began to understand that this was something that was representing a philosophy that was much older. And so I began to think more of history. Now, I had always been sort of on the side, studying the northern mythologies with whatever I could find, studying the runes and working with them, and keeping up with my own work, with the Black Cross and with the when I was with the Golden Dawn with them. And what ended up taking place was an understanding that all of this was tied together, because as I began to trace things back in my historical research of the northern mythologies, I ended up back uh, to northern India, and I came across names like Shiva and Rudra. And then I looked into Persia, ancient Persia, because that was influenced by these groups. There were wandering tribes that at one time used to really brutalize, and they actually conquered some of northern India. They raided Persia for hundreds of years, so bad that they began to call the gods of these people their demons. And then some of them went into Europe and had wars with people there. And then in Europe, and I believe in the northern mythologies, the war that's told about in a book or a writing called Voluspa between the Vanir gods and goddesses and the Aesir gods and goddesses was actually the war between these tribes who were invading, and they ended up neither side winning, so they became one people and kept
Mm.
both gods.
Aha.
And so, you begin to look at these different things, and you look in they call it Zoroastrianism, but I'm not a Zoroastrianist, obviously, but that's where their mythology lay in Persia. You find that some of the chief demons of their dark master, Angramenu, were beings like Savar. And I looked at Savar, and again, you see a being who has two ravenous wolves. All right. And you have other spirits like Aishma, who was the demon of the wounding spear. And I think in some ways, Aishma and Savar kind of united in the northern mythologies, because, of course, Odin has the two ravenous wolves, but he also has the spear that never misses.
Mm-hmm.
And the spear of Aishma is, of course, the power of the seven chakras.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I began to see how these things, long story short, tied together. And I began to think, okay, this is tying together. Now I'm seeing things because of one of my best friends that I had since childhood is a person with interest in the native shaman traditions, and he is a native person. Uh, and some of their old stories, because of course he came from a Sioux background, uh, jive very much with the stories. Different words, different context,
Mm-hmm.
same meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to say, okay, well, what's going on here? And so I began to study these things for the purpose of seeing what unites it.
Nice.
Because anybody can sit there and talk about what divides it.
Yep.
But what unites it? what is the principle behind it? And with that understanding of the principle, now we can forget about arguing about the technology or the practice that brings us to that principle and seeing what works best to bring us to that principle.
Yes.
Because if we're not fluid, we're not evolving.
Yes.
If we try to make things immutable, what is different than being an evangelical Christian?
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
So I hope that sort of in a roundabout way answers your question.
Yes, absolutely. That was amazing and awesome insights as well. Thank you. When you first began, where did you start?
I started uh, my study in earnest when I lived in a small city called Weyburn in southern Saskatchewan. And I actually continued with that when I started into actual very serious occult work is when I actually returned from Ontario and I was back in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Uh, and if anybody asks how that's spelled, please don't. Uh, it's a very long word, but and it's a great place to be from. No, I'm just kidding. I grew up there. There's wonderful people there. But here's the thing: uh, a lot of folks they're starting on this path is when they got initiated into this order or that group or this group. That's not really when anybody starts this. An initiation ceremony, whether you're getting initiated into a group or an order or to a different grade level, that is not what puts you in that grade. Some people who are die-hard defenders of the old order style would say, well, Dan, what the heck are you talking about? There is only one consciousness. We are all expressions of that consciousness, period. If we are getting initiated with actual sincerity and focus, it is a confirmation of what has already been done by our daemon, not the instigation of it. So if you may be thinking to yourself watching this, well, am I on a path like this? Well, have you had something call you? Well, whether you choose to listen to that or not, that path has been open to you. That's when you start. And
Absolutely.
that's the thought that I've had. I want to make a little bit of a statement here too about right hand and left hand path. I used to be very, very staunch left hand path when I left a lot of these things. I've been involved in some things that, like a lot of people think, Dan's always so polite. He very rarely swears. He must be a really nice guy. Sometimes I have the worst temper on the face of the earth, and I've done things that would make some people's toes curl.
Mhm.
But I came to understand as I was going through my own catharsis, because I went through a lot of things. If you think on this path, regardless of where you're going, that it's going to be some easy life, think again. There are times in my life where I have lost absolutely everything, more than once, but it was worth it. But here's the thing: right hand path, left hand path, light, darkness, good, evil. People look at them like they are two separate entities, but they're this,
Mhm.
not this.
Yeah.
And one doesn't exist without the other because they are not absolute paradigms. They are polarity of energy. That's all it is. So I don't get hung up on right hand path, left hand path. I honestly don't care. I'm interested in what this is going to do,
Yeah.
how this is going to bring about the full awakening of consciousness.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening to a person, let's say, that's a left hand path, and they look at that as being dogmatically the only thing that is, or that should be, is they end up being on the flip side of the same slave philosophy as the false lights.
Mm-hmm.
All
Good
right.
point.
It's got to be, in my thought anyway, with my experience and things that have happened, I believe it to be true.
Yeah.
It's whatever suits the moment.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. And I guess it depends on what the individual is striving to achieve, right? For
hmm
everyone
hmm
it's different, but for
yes.
those that want to produce results and evolve and grow and become, uh, they tend to be more flexible. It's more results orientated than
I like the
labels.
way one person put it. I don't remember who wrote it, but I think it was written by either William Butler Yeats or somebody in that ilk. The magician really doesn't care what spirits they're calling up, whether they're really positive spirits or really negative spirits. It's what will get the job done.
Yes.
Other than that, they don't care.
Mhm.
And you know, and dogma, there's really no use for it. Uh, the only thing that does in a limited way is help somebody get some structure that they can work with themselves. And as long as they don't impute absolute truth to it,
Mhm.
then they can use it. But unfortunately, as religion has shown us, people don't. They end
No.
up making that, the prime focus of their life,
Yeah.
and it just brings more slavery,
Yeah.
more slavery. So I've seen enough of that in my life from my own family
Yeah.
that I never want to be a part of that again.
Yes, and I don't blame you, and I don't either. I've seen my fair share, and I have no interest.
Mhm.
What inspired you to write the book, The Transcendent Keys to Power?
That was a book I didn't want to write. I resisted writing that book for 10 years
Wow.
because I thought to myself, you know what? There's so many books out there right now. Why the hell do I have to write a book? Some of the spirits would be there and saying, you need to write a book. I don't want to write this book. Well, we're going to bug you until you do.
Mm.
And,
Mhm.
so eventually I came to the place where I wrote it. And then it took me after that 3 years to actually write the thing. And people would say, well, it's not a 300-page volume. Why would it take you that long to write it? Well, because I'd write it and then I'd look at it and say, it doesn't say what I wanted to say. And into the garbage it went. And then I'd have to start reworking it and so forth. And finally, with the one that's out there right now, it's as close as I can get.
Well, it's
And
awesome.
it's actually volume one.
Okay.
Um, that's why there's only 5 spirits at the end,
Okay.
because those are basically they're the emissaries of the outer ring. Uh, Most of the book, the first part of it, is about what you need to do to get yourself into the position to actually work not only with these spirits but with magic of any kind in a consistently successful manner. It's not this ritual or that ritual. Some people have said, why didn't you put any system teaching in there? Because there is so much of that out there already. I'm not out there to reinvent the wheel and rehash what everybody else has said.
Yeah.
This is about whatever path you're on. You can use these principles and do the things to purge yourself from the mental indoctrination that we've all been subjected to. At least, and
Mhm.
it's an ongoing thing. Okay, and it can be ever expanding then in the experience, so that you can work with things without ending up as much in self deception as you can possibly get into if you don't do these things,
Yes.
because we internally can lie to ourselves like no other.
Yes.
And so this is to help bring about that brutal self honesty that's necessary, and get into a place where you can work with things and see results on a consistent basis.
Yes.
And and I called it Transcendent Keys to Power. And there, people said, "Oh, it's got a scary cover." Well, that's because that skull that has the reflection on the
Hmm.
water type of thing. I love the fact that my wife drew that.
Oh,
Uh,
nice. Yeah.
the thing is that that is the dogmatic assertions of slavery that have been basically oppressing the spiritual progress of the human race for thousands of years. It's dead, and
Nice.
you can see its reflection in the water.
Nice.
And if it was in motion, you'd see it going down into the water.
Nice. I love it.
And so that's why that's there. The thing about that book, though, is that even though it's not hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages long, if you go through everything in that book the way it's written, and I recommend people that read that book do that, give it a try. You're going to take a year to go through that book,
Mhm.
and then afterwards, if you go through it the way it's written, the way it's shown, you can adapt things to your own desire, and you can take that with you in everything else you do. That's why I wrote
Absolutely.
it.
Nice.
And also to get some of my familiars off my back.
Yes.
Now they're bugging me to get finished the volume two, which is the actual full grimoire of it, where I'm going to be putting out a book, and it's Transcendent Keys to Power, volume two,
Nice.
in quotes, The Spirits of the Outer Ring.
Oh, awesome.
And so then, we're gonna have that, and I'm gonna be putting about 30 to 35 sigils that I have from my own journals and diaries
Nice.
of spirits that I've worked with from the Outer Ring. And no, they're not wonderful computer generated graphics. They're done on a tablet, traced over, and they're not perfect and they don't look nice, but they work.
That's what
And
matters.
you know, because I'm not an artist. My father's a great artist. Me, stick man. But you know, it works, and the power of it is real.
Yes. Well, I am so excited to hear that there's a part two coming up. I think I have that in the questions, but awesome, because I was wondering that as well. Part one is amazing, and like you said, it's not hundreds and it's not a big thick book, but there's a lot of work to it. There's a lot of inner works and a lot of things that people need to sit back and do, and it's not stuff that can be done in one night if you stay up and read the book. It's a process, and I recommend that book to so many people, um, especially people that are like just starting on the left hand path and have all that baggage with them. I'm like, I have just the book for you. They're ready to start working with spirits and calling spirits, but they're still afraid of the spirits at the same time. I'm like, I know what can help you. And I recommend your book every time. It is amazing. And I'm super excited for part two.
It's going to be coming out soon. I'm almost
Awesome.
finished, but
Oh,
I'm
yay.
trying to do a much better job of editing it than I did with the other one. Because you know what? I don't care who you are. When you're looking at a sea of words, you miss things. And
Oh, yeah.
I know I've had to correct a few little things in there that I'm sitting there, but you know what? I never had an editor. I was doing that all myself. And
Yeah.
this time it's going to be a little bit more
Okay.
carefully done, but I wanted to get it out there. And
Yeah.
so,
I haven't even noticed any, but you know what? I'm not one that does that. My mind will read along the way it's supposed to go in books, and I miss the typos, and then I hear authors say that there were typos and stuff, and I'm like, oh, and then I have to go back and look. But my mind hears what they're saying, so I just go with the flow, and I understand what it's like when you're writing a sea of words over and over again. You're rereading. You're going to keep reading it a certain way. But that book is excellent, and I didn't notice any errors. But
For those aspiring authors out there, spell check doesn't work if the wrong word is spelled right.
exactly. Somebody asked, do you still consider yourself a heathen, or have you moved on to other studies? Um, the person felt like when the NRR was starting to end that you were in a process of evolution. So they're wondering what's become of you since.
I would consider myself still to be heathen. What I'm doing right now is actually nothing different than anything I've ever done. It's just that when I was doing things for the NRR, it was on the Northern mythologies. It was on rune magic. It was on understanding how these things worked. It wasn't about Qliphoth. It wasn't about Kabbalah. It wasn't about the Enochiana. It wasn't about the Luciferian. It wasn't about, the things of Angra Mainyu or Ahriman. It wasn't about any of those things. It was about runes. So I kept myself to that.
Yeah.
And like I was saying earlier, you use whatever works and what's most appropriate. To give an example of my thought process, and of course people have whatever they want, but if I want something that's immediate, I'll use the runes. They're a very powerful force. If I want to do something that is meticulous, I'll use the Enochian system because they have spirits for every particle of an element. If I want to do something that inspires people, I'll use Kabbalah. If I want to plumb the depths of darkness, I will either go through the tunnels of Set or the Qliphoth, or I will go to the realm of endless darkness to commune with Ahriman. But aren't these things contradictory? No, they're not. Because really, like I said earlier, and this is where a lot of folks get really tied up in knots because it's something that goes against what we've been taught all our lives. We think you're you and I'm me, and never the twain shall meet, save unless we have a relationship of some sort, yada, yada, yada. Truth of the matter is, each and every one of us, each and every being, whether it's here on this planet or somewhere else, should that be the case, whether it's a blade of grass or a mushroom cap, is an expression of one consciousness. And that one is equal to zero. And what's zero? Nothing that we can ever understand. It is what in Kabbalah, in the three veils of negative existence, would be called Ein. It was forbidden to talk about it because everything they say would be wrong. And the same thing exists in the elder darkness of the Qliphoth. Try to define something that's infinite and it will rip you apart. Psychologically, physically even. Not because darkness has it in for you. It's because its nature is infinity. And that can't be ever defined because any definition would be wrong. Because, and I like this, and this is from some of the Kabbalistic writers of old, but they're right. If you say that which is infinite is something, you have inferred immediately, because of the way our thought process works, that it is not something else. And that's not accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we end up falling into dualism instead of polarity. And, so when you take a look, for instance, at Shiva, who is a type of Odin as well, and Rudra as well, it's interesting. I'll just throw this out there for those that love the northern mythologies. The name Rudra in Sanskrit actually means the roarer, the first consciousness.
Okay.
The name Ymir in the northern mythologies means the roarer.
Hmm.
All right. Shiva and Rudra, in a sense, became Odin or Woden, whatever particular tribe that you're talking about, and then the way they gave him his name. If you actually want to know the real pronunciation of that name, the modern pronunciation, of course, Odin is it was actually Othin.
Yeah.
Okay, the lore of Shiva, all right, it's beautiful and far more complex. One of the things, and it was penned in a poem 1,000 years ago. It states, "I am not my body. I am not my mind. I am not my feelings. I am not my perception. I am not of the five elements. I am pure awareness. I am the eternal Shiva. I want for nothing, for I am everything."
Mm.
When you connect with that through your daemon, that's the infinite, that's the one. Everything you do, whether it be in ritual, meditation, other forms of magic, is absolutely powerful. Self doubt, when you have connected with that and you're letting that flow in you, does not exist. And of course, doubting oneself is the death knell of a work of magic.
Yes.
Okay? So you can see why that's important. But this all relates and is transcendent. And these beings that are out there, they are not in competition with one another. All right, except for maybe one or two. And we know their names.
Yes.
All right. The truth is, though, they just bring one to that consciousness as much as we're able to without obliterating ourselves of the one and of our daemon or our fetch or whatever you want to call it.
Mm.
And so, working in this way, it just revolutionizes the way a person's experience is, no matter what path they are walking on. And that's why I share it, because there's a few others that do this, not very many. Most are talking about this particular system or that
Mhm.
particular system, which is fine. That's great.
Mhm.
But it's not something that I think, as human consciousness awakens further in this new aeon that's about to begin,
Mhm.
it's going to be something that evolves into more of this transcendent power that I've been talking about than what it ever has been in the last 6,000 years, perhaps.
Yes. Yep.
So,
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that because more people need to consider that and just be open to that because limiting oneself and one's perceptions is just that, it's limiting.
mhm.
But thank you for sharing that.
Oh, no problem. But no, I haven't given up heathenry for those that are there. I'm no different than I ever was. I'm just talking about some other aspects of what I've been doing. So that's all.
Yes. And until next time, I wish you dark and wild blessings.